The ongoing coronavirus pandemic has left Formula One on an indefinite hiatus. With the global situation changing daily, it can be difficult to keep up to date with every development. Here's a guide for the F1 stories you might have read this weekend and the context behind them. Memories of the Chinese Grand Prix. Alexis Nunes, Nate Saunders and Lawrence Edmondson talk about the best and worst moments from the race that would have been taking place on April 19. Listen to the latest episode. An announcement from the French Grand Prix organizers is expected imminently on the status of its June 28 event. It was thought that the remote Paul Ricard circuit in the south of France, which features its own airstrip for teams to fly in its equipment, would be an ideal place to start the season in a spectator-free event, but President Emmanuel Macron has confirmed that a ban on large public events will continue until July. The Austrian Grand Prix was one of the most popular venues for Max Verstappen fans to make the journey from the Netherlands. Joe Klamarafp via Getty Images. The current state of things means that nailing down a start date for the F1 season is impossible. The 2020 calendar as we knew it ahead of the year has been torn up at this point. Teams are discussing a number of options but are doing so against what is an ever-changing situation. Austria's recent relaxation of lockdown restrictions has raised optimism that it can host the first race of the year in early July, according to a BBC report on Friday. The Red Bull Ring is based outside the remote Austrian town of Spielberg. The prospect of holding 2 or 3 races the following weekend at Silverstone, home of the British Grand Prix, has also been discussed. While it's easy to see the merits of the Austria idea, complicating everything remains the state of play in the UK and Italy, where 9 of F1's 10 teams and tyre supplier Pirelli are based. The UK has extended its lockdown into mid-May while similar restrictions remain in Italy. It is hard to imagine teams being allowed to travel en masse from these places while those restrictions are in place. The popular Italian Grand Prix is one race which might not take place at all in 2020. Sutton Images. The Belgian-Italian GP doubleheader traditionally comes after the August summer break, but both famous races look unlikely to be held on their usual dates. Belgium has extended a ban on mass public events until September. The Belgian GP was slated for August 30. Italian GP bosses seem wary of waiting too long to make a decision on its race, with ACI President Angelo Sticci Damiani pointing to the late cancellation of the Australian Grand Prix in March as fans descended on the Melbourne circuit. We can no longer afford to make mistakes like in Australia when the GP was cancelled with the public already at the track, Damiani told Gazzetta dello Sport. That was a setback for everyone from Liberty Media to the teams to the local organisers. To start again and then be forced to stop would be a disaster. Monza's location on the outskirts of Milan is in the heart of Italy's worst-hit region, making it hard to imagine the event taking place in early September. Worst still for the organisers of those races is that the European climate leaves limited wiggle room for F1 in terms of rearranging Belgium's or Italy's events much later than October. The Chinese Grand Prix was supposed to take place on April 19. Lars Baron. Getty Images. F1 motorsport boss Ross Brawn has said October is a drop-dead point in terms of getting a 2020 season off the ground. If there is no prospect of racing before then, it then becomes likely F1 would cancel the entire season. Brawn remains confident F1 can hold up to 19 races this year if it gets underway in time. Achieving that figure would depend on holding multiple races on single weekends like the Silverstone discussion mentioned above. It is also willing to extend the current season into January next year if absolutely necessary. Of the races that failed to take place so far, only Australia and Monaco are cancelled for good. In an ideal world, F1 would reschedule as many of these as possible. F1 has already agreed to shorten race weekends from 3 to 2 days to ease burden on teams which face the prospect of multiple triple headers, 3 races in 3 consecutive weekends if a championship season does take place. The current hiatus has brought F1 finances into sharp focus, with the lack of racing meaning a drop in revenue. F1 will implement a budget cap next season, capped at $175 million for every team. Teams have already agreed on bringing that down to $150 million to financially protect teams next season, but some are pushing for an even greater cut. McLaren wants it reduced to $100 million for next season. Team principal Andreas Seidel has said the current crisis should be the final wake-up call for a sport which was already unhealthy before. The reduction is likely to be much less substantial, with the BBC discussa.